I know that we can.
I know darn well we can work it out. Oh, yes, we can. I know we can. Yes, we can. Oh, why can't we if we want to? Yes, we can.
I know we can make it work.
Thank you for joining Yes We Can with Pastor Sherman D.Manning. I have a fascinating, awesome, terrific guest today. He was on with us on the last show, and I brought him back for a second show. And I must say that he holds the record. Thus far, he is the only guest that I've brought in for two shows back to back. But what he's talking about is very, very interesting. And I happen to have met him recently, and I was very impressed by him. First impressions mean a lot with me, and I know that he is a man who loves God and he loves people, so I brought him back again. In case you missed the first show, my guest for today is Paul Webster. He is the founder and executive director of Hope Street Coalition, which is an advocacy organization changing public policy that leads to the devastation we see on our streets every day, especially right here in L.A. and across the country. He's also the executive director of the Los Angeles Alliance for Human Rights. He is a great friend of my great friend, attorney Elizabeth Mitchell, which makes him a friend of mine. I met him just a few days ago, and we just have a lot to talk about. In the first hour, we talked about the problem, and he pretty much laid out the problem for me. He is a data man. He's a numbers man. Reminds me of my best friend on the planet, Peter Andrist in Switzerland. I remember Peter and I were always opposites. I would always talk about the promised land and how we have got to get to the promised land. And I was a guy who could go out and motivate everybody and pump them up and get them to believe that we can make it to the promised land. And Peter would come in like Paul, no pun intended, and say to me, but how are we going to get there? He wanted to know what steps we had to take, what the roadmap was, and how to get there. And so I found out in my life in 48 years on the planet that a Peter can't make it without a Paul, and a Sherman can't make it without a Paul. And so I am glad to welcome Mr. Paul Webster back to the show today. Mr. Webster, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on again. I really appreciate it.
And so in the last hour, we came up to the climax. We were talking about this lawsuit. So tell me what made you, your organization, the powers that be, decide that you needed to file this lawsuit. Talk about that to me.
Yeah, so, Los Angeles is one of these great kind of political dramatic stories where we have mayors and city council members, and they come in and they promise great things, and sometimes they deliver and sometimes they don't. And I think one of the challenges, particularly on homelessness, is that we've had a lot of people come in to LA and promise to deliver, and they just hasn't happened. In fact, we've seen the problem get much, much worse.
Yes.
So after the citizens of Los Angeles are waiting on kind of the political and the legislative branch to change some of these things, and they're waiting at the governor or the mayor to change things, we just can't wait any longer. And so what happened a few years ago is that there were a number of, frankly, very, very unhappy, very mad business owners, residents, even some of the homeless themselves that said, how long must we continue to wait? Kind of like the children of Israel, right?
Right.
How long are we going to wait?
Preach, Paul.
So what we decided is, since we tried to appeal on the executive branch, tried to appeal at the legislative branch, we decided we would use the judicial branch, and we filed a lawsuit because at the end of the day, if you want to get stuff done, you sue somebody. And so we sued the city and the county of Los Angeles. And really what most people want in LA is they want clean and safe streets. We want clean and safe streets for residents. We want clean and safe streets for businesses. We want to be able to walk up and down the sidewalks, get where we need to go. And we also want clean and safe streets for people who are having challenges, so that they don't have to stay on those streets. And
but
people forget.
If I may, take me back. I want to know, unpack that for me. How did you decide? When did you decide? And who decided the next step we're going to take now is a lawsuit? Was there a day? Were you all in a room together? Were you in a meeting? How was the decision made, and who made the decision? Take us there.
Yeah, so a lot of this, some of this happened before I was a part of the LA Alliance, but I can recap it for you, I think,
Okay.
pretty quickly. So what happened was we have, since we started talking about suing the city and the county, obviously there are a number of lawyers involved, and look out when you got a bunch of lawyers in a room, right? I'm not a lawyer, so I can make that joke.
Right.
But what happened was we started seeing all of these legal decisions. These lawsuits would come up about things like, well, you can't clear the streets, or you can't remove, what some people would call trash, what other people would call possessions. You can't remove those from the streets. And so the city of Los Angeles was just capitulating to these things. And when you do that, you basically create precedent, and that turns into a legal problem. So what we basically said is like, well, our constituents, they have rights. People who live in downtown, on the west side, on Skid Row, they have a right to go up and down the sidewalk without being accosted, without being worried that they're going to step in something that, frankly, could really lead to some serious health issues. They have a right to be safe in their businesses. They have a right for their customers to go back and forth. And even, folks that are on the street, the homeless themselves, if the city says we're going to house you, they should be able to rely on that promise. And those things weren't happening. So what we did was, and this was back, I want to say it was early 2020, we said, look, let's put pen to paper, and let's start writing out our complaints, and let's start identifying some things that we want. And we decided that we wanted more shelters because we knew that permanent supportive housing, the development of that was going to be a long time coming. We needed more treatment and clinical services because we knew that the way that people stay in shelter and stay in housing is that their illnesses are treated, if their addictions are addressed, if their mental illness is addressed. And then we knew the law. We knew that there's this famous case from a few years ago called Martin v. Boise that really changed the way that cities can engage and remove people from the streets. And so we said, once we establish shelter, once we provide services and clinical treatment, then we can come along and basically tell people, look, we have a bed for you. We have a place. We have a place for you. We're not saying you can't be homeless. You just need to accept some of these services, or you need to go elsewhere. And so that's really the nature of our lawsuit, and that's kind of how it all happened. And so we filed it in
Back up.
federal
Take me
court.
here. Excuse me. How did you all settle on this law firm? Spertus, I don't have the full name, but Elizabeth's law firm.
Spertus, Landis, and Umhofer.
There you go. How did you find that? How did you connect?
I believe the way it was Spertus, Landis, and Umhofer. I believe what it was is, and I've heard it told it in a couple of different ways.
Okay.
I think they were kind of the last man standing because there was just a lot of challenges with finding a law firm that was up for the fight of getting crossways with the city, up for the fight of getting crossways with the county. And I think the people at Spertus, Landis, and Umhofer, they really understood what was going on, is that this is costing people's lives. And this isn't about kind of business as usual, as keeping chummy with our buddies, but really making a statement to say, we are on the side of the oppressed and the dying and the people who are being hassled, and we need the government to respond to our complaint. And so that's really kind of what happened, is we were really looking for people who took this seriously and wanted to go to the mat on this. And
I'm so glad you found them, because when you were talking about, it's not easy to find a firm that is willing to go up against the city, because what I have found out through my personal life is that, back in the day when I was a kid, there was a motto that said, you can't fight City Hall. Well, you actually can fight them, but you got to be prepared for the battle, because they fight, and I hate to say this, but they play dirty. They don't fight fairly, Mr. Webster. When COVID-19 initially hit, I did a protest in front of the mayor's house, and it was all over the newspaper. Pastor arrested not for protesting, but for felony stalking in front of the mayor's house. Although I had homeless people with me, although I made my protest known to the mayor's security staff, although the mayor sent his chief of staff to attempt to set up a meeting with me the day before my arrest, by the way. Anna Guerrero called me on the cell phone and said, the mayor wants to meet with you over Zoom. And I said, sure, I'll meet with Mr. Garcetti as long as he is willing to allow a few homeless people to attend this Zoom meeting also. I want their voices to be heard. She refused that. And the following day, I am arrested for felony stalking. I had a $150,000 bail, which means 10% through a bail bondsman. And then suddenly 30 days later, the district attorney, who was Jackie at that time, was it Lacey? Was that her last name?
Jackie Lacey?
Yes. Oh, there's not a case here. He was actually protesting. And so now I'm suing the city of LA. And I said that to say that when I was trying to find attorneys to sue this city, it was very difficult. Some of them would get on the phone with me and tell me about what terrible people they were. Many of them were actually familiar with the arrest and how horrible it was, but they did not want to take on the city. So I think it's great that you were able to find this law firm. Before we continue, tell me a little bit about our friend, Elizabeth Mitchell. What kind of person is she?
No, she's just a great advocate. I mean, she's smart, she's resourceful, and she's incredibly determined.
Yes.
So, she used to work for LAPD, and she saw some really challenging cases. She saw, the issues of what was going on when people would get arrested and rearrested and rearrested. Right. And so I can't imagine someone better suited to really understand the needs of folks. And I'll tell you what, when she first filed this lawsuit and she started started talking to people, kind of like what you do on Skid Row, just started talking to people and saying, hey, this is an injustice. Do you want to be a part of it? Right. So I really like Liz. I think she's a brilliant mind, and she's using her brilliant mind to improve society and fight for what we all believe in. And I can't, that's just, to me, that's the kind of people that I want to be around.
Absolutely. And she doesn't know, their firm doesn't know whether they will ever get paid for doing this work or not. I mean, let's hope that they do. And I think they deserve to be paid quite lucratively, to be quite frank with you. But to take on a case like this, I think is just terrific, and it's awesome, because here again, and you mentioned earlier, abuse of power and injustice and things like that. And one day I have to do an entire show on the abuses of the system, wrongful convictions, Mr. Webster, how they set people up. I mean, and I'm not some conspiracy theorist. I believe that by and large, most of our police officers are great people who risk their lives and do a wonderful job every day, hands down. It is a tough job, and I have so much respect for police officers, but it doesn't take but one bad apple to ruin a bunch. And in every profession, Mr. Webster, and I digress, including pastoring and preaching and ministry, you always have some bad apples. And it is these bad apples who will go out and charge a man with a crime he didn't commit, and you have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. And most people don't have that kind of money. I'm facing a challenge right now that I can't talk about, but I will tell you this much I can say. I recently spent $100,000 on attorney's fees fighting with these people who can very, very often be corrupt. I digress. Back to the point. So you've painted the picture for us. We know what the problem is. Let me ask you this, because we could go all day long. If you were appointed tomorrow as homelessness czar, how would you go about cleaning up Skid Row? I know we have the lawsuit. I believe in it. I think Judge David Carter is doing a wonderful job, and I think we're going to see a lot of success there. Thank God for them. Hats off to Elizabeth and her firm and to your organization. But Karen Bass has just won the mayoralty. Or Rick Caruso. One of them has just won, and they call and say, Paul Webster.
I just like the fact that I'm now the homeless czar, so thanks for that.
Paul, you are now the homeless czar. Tell us your plan for how you're going to just start with Skid Row. How are you going to clean this place up?
I would do two things. I would address two things. So in most communities, there are just too few places for people to go who are untreated and unhoused. And really, when you kind of go back to the origin of this is because there's just a history of failed policies regarding mental illness, failed policy of addressing homelessness, and failed policy addressing addiction treatment. So what I think needs to happen is we need to create more places for people to go, and there needs to be really quality treatment once people get to those places. Right now, there's kind of like two rungs on the ladder. There's the street, and there's this very high bar of permanent supportive housing. But if you have challenges in your life, if you have a conviction, if you have some mental illness, if you have addiction, the other rung on the ladder that is very, very close to you is jail or prison. We need to create more rungs on the ladder. What do I mean by that? Well, we need to have more, for example, adult residential facilities. We need to have more crisis units for when people are in crisis with addiction or crisis in mental health. We need more sober living facilities. We need more facilities that train people and help them get their GEDs and get them into workforce training. We need places that address the challenges of the seriously mentally ill who may never recover fully, but we need to keep them safe. We need to keep them stabilized. We need to care for these people in whatever capacity that means. And here's something else that needs to happen. We know that addiction and mental illness often go together. And we know that it's hard addressing just one of those problems. So we need to be prepared when people relapse. We need to prepare when people have bad days in terms of their mental illness. We can't let the bed that never says no be the jail. We need to have more rungs on the ladder, if you will, so that people can be appropriately treated and appropriately cared for in the appropriate setting.
Precisely.
My goal.
Let me interject there. You and I were talking on Skid Row the other day. You and I were talking about a young man that I got housing for. Looks younger than he is. He's 30 years old, and I won't call his name. But and I've told you that about every 7 or 8 days, for 20 or 30 minutes, he begins to talk in a very irrational and nonsensical manner. And I know that, coinciding with what you were just talking about, in certain housing programs, he would be thrown out just for that 20 to 30 minute interval when he's not violent, when he's not really doing anything. Right. And so that goes back to those rungs on the ladder that you're talking about. So I totally concur with what you were saying. Pick up where you left off. Yeah.
So what Hope Street, what we're doing is we're advancing an initiative that we call housing that heals. It's nice to have housing,
right?
But we also need to have housing that has some goal of improving the health outcomes, improving the mental illness and stability, helping people get sober. Right now, the priority of the federal government is just housing. And that means the priority of the state of California, the priority of LA County, the priority of Los Angeles is housing. And what happens is the people that are the sickest, the people who need that treatment and need that additional care and that additional support, they get passed over for the housing, and therefore they end up in places like Skid Row or jail. Right. What we need to do is we need to change our vision when it comes to mental illness and addiction. We need to make it easy to get treatment and hard to get high, hard to get addicted. We need to make it easy to get treatment and hard to deteriorate on the street because you have a mental illness.
You told me that the other day, but I love it. But I went home and I thought the Peter in me came out, and the Paul Webster in me, the data man, told me how to get there. So when you say we need to make it easier to get housing or healed and harder to get high, Unpack that for me. Tell me what are some of the ways we could do that. You are the homelessness czar. You're not Pastor Manning. You're not here to just preach about what we need to do. I need you to tell me, how are we going to do that? So tell us.
So one of the things that we need to do is we need to increase the supply of places where people can get recovered. We need to increase the reimbursement from the state of California and from the federal government for treatment programs. In other words, so for example, let's just use this as an example. There was a time when, folks like you and me, when we were kids and we would get thirsty, what would we do? We would go to the hose and we would turn on the spigot. We would drink water out of the hose. That's just how we did it. Or we would go to those water fountains. Remember those water fountains?
Right in front of my house we had one. Yes.
The water fountain barely dribbled out, right? Well, now there's this new way to drink water.
Yes.
And it's a plastic water bottle.
Talk to me.
And they're everywhere.
I was telling Anthony the other day, Paul, I said, when I was a kid, I had never seen a bottle of water. Where did this come from? But go ahead. Make your point.
What the water providing businesses did is they created a market and they created an abundance of options when it came to drinking water. And you know what? People drink water out of a bottle now. They don't drink water out of a hose.
Wow, absolutely. You're correct.
We need to apply that same principle to the provision of treatment for drug addiction and treatment for mental illness. Because when there's more of that stuff, not less of that stuff, it's going to be easier to access. So that requires money. Maybe what it means is instead of building more prisons and more jails, we're building more safe units so that people can get over their addictions and become stabilized and receive good treatment. When they get out of these units, maybe we need to build more of these kinds of sober living facilities so that they can integrate back into society a little bit at a time and understand how to navigate a lot of the challenges that before caused them to really spiral out of control. We need to create and we need to fund more what I call recovery communities. There's a wonderful book out right now, and I introduced you to Sam Quinones the other day on the street. He's written a book called The Least of Us.
Absolutely.
And it details how methamphetamine and fentanyl are destroying communities. But at the very end of the book, Sam talks about this community in Ohio that was devastated by opioid addiction and economic challenges. And what they did was they found that this became what they call a recovery community. So you had former addicts coming because they saw this as a mecca for them to get the kind of job training and to get the kind of support. And it wasn't an easy thing. It wasn't like people roll out the red carpet, but they would have abandoned warehouses. And so an addict would say, before my life went down the toilet, I was a carpenter. Let's go into that warehouse and let's build apartment units for people so that they have places to live. Another one said, you know what? I know that when I work out, I feel better and I don't have to worry about the temptations of addiction. So he created a CrossFit gym to support people in recovery. There used to be this place in America where neighbors would go to receive support and receive the kind of engagement and acknowledgement and love that they needed when they were going through hard times. Do you know what those places were called?
What?
They were called churches.
Talk to me. So my question to you is how are we going to do this? I mean, let me say that many years ago, I would always give a stump speech, if you will, about it costs more to send a man to jail than it does send him to Yale. We've built more prisons in the last 20 years. I mean, and we could go deep into it. I saw a study that said in poor neighborhoods. There are sociologists and anthropologists who determine how many prisons they're going to build 20 years from now based upon the test scores of third-year-olds. So this is a country, let's face it, that believes in building prisons. And you mentioned it's going to take money. We have enough money in this country to do anything we want to do. My heart is with the people of Ukraine. I love them. I care for them. I pray for them. I think we should be supporting them the way we are supporting them. But my point is, if we ask for $1 trillion to build some recovery centers and treatment centers that you're talking about, the government would say no. But when it's something that they want to do, they figure out a way to get it done. I don't know if they'll say no. I think they would. But my question to you is going to be this. What are you going to do to get Republicans and Democrats on board? You talk about you have an initiative. What are you going to do to get these initiatives passed? Because everything you just said is music to my ears. I was on with the president of the Baptist Ministers Conference last week, and we've concurred with what you just said. The churches have to become more involved. Trust me, behind the scenes, I'm on many of my brothers, and some of them, like Dr. James Perkins and L.A. Kazee and others, are willing to come together. But my question to you is, because a lot of this is just politics, I want to know, how are you going to convince politicians to sign on to making it more difficult to get high and making it easier to get healed? What can we do, Paul?
Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to do a better job of collecting good data at the local level. Mm-hmm. So what happens is that because of federal policy, we collect data on homelessness pretty much once a year in January. Mm-hmm. And it's a really ineffective, and it's a very inaccurate way to understand the scope of the problem. Mm-hmm. So we need to start collecting data at the local level. Mm-hmm. When we start collecting data at the local level, we need to also raise awareness. So people need to understand what the real issue is. Right now, there's a narrative out there that says people are homeless because they can't afford the rent. Yes, there are people who can't afford the rent, but we know from our experience and what we've seen on Skid Row and other parts of Los Angeles that there are a lot of people homeless because they all have a lot of significant challenges. So first thing we need to do, you said I was a data guy. I am a data guy. We need to collect that data. We need to connect that data to the failure of some of these policies. We need to raise the awareness so that people can say, I want you, politician, to put your money here, not there. And we need to make it very, very simple so that we can start saying the status quo is not working. We need a new vision. The new vision is restoring communities and restoring human beings. And so, yes, it's going to take some reform of policy so we can, I mean, you know, there's an old saying that if you're in a hole, the first thing is stop digging.
Yes.
So we need to stop digging.
Right.
We need to create more flexibility through policy and regulatory reform. So local communities have more options in terms of what they want to do and how they can do it, in terms of creating more shelters, creating more transitional housing, supporting faith-based initiatives, requiring service. If a program wants to require service because their objective is to get people clean and sober and get them jobs, they should be able to do that, and they should be able to get funded by the federal government and the state government in order to do that. Right now, that doesn't exist. That's right. So we have to stop digging the hole, and then we need to start casting a vision for what housing that heals look like. I see some of the political wins. We've seen Gavin Newsom, really start championing issues like care courts and mental health, and he's dedicated billions of dollars for behavioral health infrastructure. This is a great start. We're starting to have conversations at the local level and at the national level about the challenge and the brokenness of our mental illness system. People need to become informed, and they need to tell their representatives that we've got to put, for every dollar that we put into homelessness, we got to put an additional dollar into mental illness facilities and mental illness reform. And there's some real challenges going on at the federal level. So those are some specifics. I think being able to create different types of facilities where people don't have to go to jail, but that they can actually get their treatment and their mental illness stabilized and sometimes overcome. I think that would be, to your point, it would be a low-cost solution to the challenges of jails. But I think, and the reason that I wanted to be on your podcast, Pastor, is because we just need to raise people awareness. Mm-hmm. We need to raise people up and give them a vision of what life could be. And I see what's going on in Skid Row. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of Black people on Skid Row. Mm-hmm. And that's a tragedy. Mm-hmm. We need to come alongside some of the families. We need to start creating recovery communities within our communities. We need to do it. The difference between the Black community and the white community is a lot of times the white community has the money to put their kids in rehab, and the Black community doesn't. And that's a problem. That's a problem. I'm not saying that the white community has the solution.
I totally agree with you, and there are a lot of Black people on Skid Row. I'm one of them. Unfortunately, we're out of time here. I got to get Paul back again, but I want to say I'm going to try to get this podcast to Mr. Newsom. I'm going to send it to Karen Bass. I'm going to send it to Rick Caruso. Let's try to get this podcast with you and I talking here to some of the movers and shakers and certainly to the pastors. And what I would love to do, and I don't know how to do it yet, we have to get together and talk about it. I've met a lot of brilliant people. If I could get Elizabeth Mitchell, if I could get Frank Gooch, if I could get Matthew Close, John Eisen, if I could get you, the writer we had the other day, if I could get all of us in a room together, you cannot convince me that we could not figure out a way to get these people off the street and to create what you like to say, housing that heals. And I want to say to every politician who might be watching me today, jail is not the answer. Jail is hell. And once they are jailed, they will get out again. 99% of the people in prisons today will be out of prison within the next 4 or 5 years. And when they come out, they will be sicker and slicker and broker, and they'll return to prison quicker. Yep. And the people they might victimize on the way back in might be one of your relatives. I got to go. Mr. Webster, 30 seconds. Any closing words for my audience?
If you want to join our fight and advocate for policy change, go to my website, www.hopestreetcoalition.org, and simply sign up for emails, and we'll get you engaged. We're meeting with legislators, meeting with policy folks all the time, and we're trying to get the word out. And every time somebody can sign up and add their voice to it, that much better. Thank you.
We're going to have you back on the show again. Thank you for coming. And when you get this podcast, Paul, I want you to send it to everyone on your mailing list. I'm going to have you come and address pastors very, very soon. Gotta go.
I'd love to do that.
This was a powerful show. Ladies and gentlemen, you can make a difference in your neighborhood. We can do it together. Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
I know that we can.